Thank God for giving me this opportunity to speak before you all. I want to acknowledge all the church members, all the pastors who are present here. I want to thank God for giving this opportunity. So when I was contemplating a topic that I wanted to speak about, I came across a passage in the book of Romans, which kind of spoke to me in a different way. And I originally had an idea of what I wanted to speak about, but God, when I turned to this passage, God specifically kind of told me, this is what I want you to speak about today. So I'm going to put that other message aside and I'll save it for another time. God is probably telling me, now's not the time for that message, but speak here for this now. So if you could please turn with me to Romans chapter 11, and we're going to read verses 16 to 21. And it's also up there on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to read that out loud first. So it says, if part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, now share in the nourishing sap of the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this: you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. So when I read this passage, what kind of broke down to me was two kind of categories. And the categories were correlation and then removal and inclusion. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the correlation, and that's in verse 16. So the definition of correlation is a mutual connection between two or more things. So there's a bond between these two things. And we see them when we read verse 16, it states that one part considered holy, then the rest is also considered holy as well. It is by association that the half that was not inspected was considered holy. So for the holiness that was found inspected is given to the other half as well. And there's two verses that are similar in the Bible that speak about similar things regarding yeast and dough. Because in verse 16 it says, the part of the dough offered as first fruits is considered holy. So one of the verses is 1 Corinthians 5 verse 6. And I'll read that. It says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? And another verse is Galatians 5 verse 9. It says, a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. So the two verses that I read before speaks about sin in this context. It's saying how sin can affect the whole dough. Just a little bit of yeast impacts the whole dough that is there. But however, the opposite can be true as well. If there is some good that exists in that group, that good can infect everyone else around it. So even though people always assume that evil will always spread, if there's also good there, that goodness can spread just as easily as well. And an example that I think about is maybe I'm the only Christian person that professes my faith at my workplace. Everyone else may be some other religion, or they may be agnostic, or they may be atheist. And they can influence me, and they can cause me to do things that may be not according to the Word of God. And that could be the yeast and the sin infecting me. But the opposite can be true as well. I can be the one that impacts the people around me. Instead of me allowing the sin and negativity to impact my life, I switch it around and I impact the people around me. Whether it's at my workplace, at my school, wherever it may be, you still have that opportunity. So Paul speaks about how a small part of the dough is taken from the whole, and it should be by association, the part that is not inspected is a good representation of what the dough is. If it is found holy, that part that is inspected, the rest is assumed to be holy as well. And then he says in the second part, if the root is holy, so are the branches. So he states that the idea that the roots and branches is further explored in the next coming verses, but it's a connection that comes from that the branches get all its nutrients and all the things that it needs from the roots. So everything that comes from the branches is associated with the roots. So if the roots are considered holy, the branches have to be holy as well, because they come from the roots, and everything they get is from the roots. So this is the correlation. If a representative part of the whole, which is that part of the dough, is found holy, then the rest is holy. If the roots that provide all the nutrients and everything that the branches need to grow and flourish are found holy, then the branches are holy. This correlation, this connection, is made by association of one thing to another. So that's the first part. So if we go to the next slide, then this one is called removal and inclusion. So I'm going to read verse 17 to 21 again. It says, if some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap of the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to the other branches. If you do consider this, you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. So when we look at verse 17, it says some of the branches have been broken off. And what Paul is referencing here is the Israelites. He references it back in chapter 9, 10, and also the beginning of chapter 11, of how the Israelites turned away from God. So he cut them off from the tree, and he's left those branches open. There's openings there now. And with those openings, he took the wild olive shoots and grafted them into the tree. So they were given the opportunity through the Israelites' rejection to be included. So there was a removal, and then there was an inclusion that happened there. And so from that grafting, we share in the nourishing sap of the tree, and now we are included. And when I read this passage, I wanted to get a better understanding of what does grafting mean? Because when I read this, I didn't have a great understanding. So I went and did some research about what grafting is. And grafting is a process that is very meticulous and very careful. It has to be done very carefully, because it's a process of taking a shoot of a desired plant and placing it into the stalk of another in order for that plant to grow from that. So the process is delicate and requires careful pruning of the host plant, the shoot, which is going to be transplanted as well. And so for true grafting to take place, the tissues of the plant must be in contact with one another, and they must grow together for a period of time. This can take months to even years before that bond is secured. So it is a careful and delicate process that takes a lot of time. So everyone here is probably thinking, Wesley, I don't understand what you're saying. This is a really weird concept that, many people here might understand. So I came up with a different kind of analogy to modern way to understand what does grafting mean. So everybody here knows the company Apple. They make all of the iPhones and a lot of the computers that we use, the tablets. So let's say Apple decide that they're gonna fire the guy who isn't part of their development team. He's not doing a good enough job. He's not doing what he's supposed to, so they fire him. They have an opening now. And then they hear about some guy in California who's got a lot of great ideas, and he's starting to grow up, and he's got some things that look good for Apple to come in. So the Apple decides, we're gonna bring him in, we're gonna interview him, but we're not gonna include him immediately. We'll give him a 1 month kind of grace period and see how he bonds with everyone else. How does he bond with the people who are there, the employees? Can he lead them? Can he direct them? Can he fit well with everyone who's already there? And they see that if he does fit well, they decide that they are going to hire him, and they create that bond. In the same fashion is what Paul is talking about here. And when Paul talks about grafting the tree, it was an example to make people understand, because these examples are for people who were not as educated, or people who lived in the common times. This is something that they understood. So the reason I gave a more common or more modern example is that's something that we can understand. There's an opening there. A company brings someone new who has good, fresh ideas, and they put them in to help their company grow more. So that's the same thing that Paul is talking about. There was they cut off the original that was rejected them, and they grafted in something new so that way it could grow. And so, but Paul, however, gives a warning in verse 18. He says, do not consider yourself to be superior to the other branches. If you do this, consider this, you do not support the root, but the root supports you. So he's telling us that you do not support the roots support you. He's telling you to take a seat and be humble. There's a humbleness that requires that God has grafted you into his tree. It's not because of anything that you did. It's not anything that the work that I had in my life. But God chose me and decided that I was worthy enough to be part of his life and part of his family tree, and he put me there. And the idea of the roots and the branches brought something else to my mind, where it's the unseen God that is caring for us. In the same way that the branches, when I see a tree, I see the trunk, I see branches, and I see leaves. But the thing that holds everything together and provides the nutrients for that tree to grow are the roots that are underground and are unseen. In the same way, it's our faith. We don't stand by ourselves. We have nothing that is of worth that we can say, I did this, so this is why I am this great. It's the unseen God that helps us, that is behind the scenes, that is supporting us and keeping us steadfast when things may try to bring us down. He's the one that's giving us the word and the nutrients and his grace to keep going every single day. So the unseen God that we don't see with our physical eyes is there supporting us. And it's a truth that I often overlook in my daily life. I forget that, and I get caught up in the things all around me, and I forget about the God that's constantly watching over me, protecting me, and building me up daily. And again, in verse 19, if you look at it, it seems like there's a conversation that Paul is kind of creating where he says, you will say then, branches were broken off so that I can be grafted in. So it's taken from the perspective of a Gentile who's claiming ownership of a position, because he's thinking, God did all of this for me. He found that I was worthy, so he put me in there for a specific reason because of the good things I've done. But then he's saying, granted, in verse 20, but you were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. So Paul is telling you not to become arrogant. The other branches were broken off because of their rejection of him. It's not because you were found worthy, he rejected them. And then in that same sentence, he said, you stand by faith. It's not because of the works you've done. It's nothing that you can say that you've done enough to earn that position in his branch or in his root or in his family tree. There's nothing that you've done that makes you worthy of that position. It's just that you stand by faith. By the grace of God, we were found worthy enough to be grafted into that tree. There's nothing I can say that I've done in my life that deserves the grace of God. Grace is something that it's without merit, it's nothing that you deserve. It's the willingness and the faithfulness of God to say, I will bring you in. It's nothing that you can do to earn it. There's no amount of awards I can achieve. There's no amount of things, that money I can make. There's no position I can achieve to say that I earned this. It's because God chose me and said, I will choose you by faith and by grace. And so he's saying that don't forget, the roots support the branches. I support you. There's nothing that you do that is without my influence there. And then he's saying also, do not be arrogant, but tremble. And when I think about that, Paul is telling them that I think it's something that's often forgotten in common times, which is the fear of God. Oftentimes what is depicted is that God is this all-loving Father. We become disillusioned. We think that, God will only do good things for me. He always has my good involved. He'll never do anything bad to me. I don't have to worry about that because God always does good. But we forget that the same God who waited 40 years for the Israelites who didn't believe in him to perish away before he allowed them to enter the promised land is the same God that we follow now. He is a God who is strict, and he is a God full of fear as well. And so when we think about God, we often downplay him as just, he's someone that's always has good for me. I feel like when Paul is saying, do not be arrogant but tremble, It's a sign that you have to have reverence towards God, understanding who you are speaking to, understanding who God is. He's the maker of the heavens and the earth. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. He knows all things. And understanding that aspect of God, you need to have a reverence and an understanding and a fear of God as well. Not a fear that I fear God and I'm not going to do anything because God will smite me down. But it's a holy fear, knowing that God is holy and that I cannot approach him just because how I am, because of all the sin in my life. But when I ask him to forgive my sins and I ask him to cleanse me, I can approach him because God is holy. And just that understanding that we need to have that kind of fear in our lives as well. Understanding that he's not just a God who's all loving, but he's the God who is eternal. That he has the God who was in the Old Testament, who brought wrath upon the people who disobeyed him, is the same God that we have now. And it's not just to make us all fearful, but it's to understand that who God truly is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. So when we get to verse 21, it says, if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. So this is a final warning that Paul is giving us, saying that you are the ones who were grafted in. You were not part of the original. If God chose to take out the branches of the descendants of the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his chosen people, if he chose to take them out of his family tree, what makes you think you're an exception to all of that? What makes you think that you're special, that he won't take you out as well if you don't obey and follow him? It's nothing, and it's important for us to remember this daily as we live our lives. Forget our positions of being chosen, because it's God who chose us. There's nothing that I did of my work that deserved to be put into that tree. It's because he chose me, and he saw that I was worthy, or he saw the potential in me, and he decided to choose me. Certain branches were removed, and then there were others who were included and grafted into the family tree of God. But we need to remember that there's also a chance that we could be removed as well if we reject God, if we don't live according to his word. And so when I reflected on the whole passage, it gives me a reminder of who I am and where I come from. The opportunity that was given to me and how I should take that knowledge and how I should be humble and how I should have a reverence towards God. The branches were grafted and chosen for a reason. It's often chosen because it's special and it can bear fruit. So we need to take advantage of the opportunity given to us. We were given access to the nutrients of God, to have his grace, to have his favor, to have his presence in our lives. So with that, we need to develop. We need to spiritually grow daily because we have those gifts. We need to take advantage of that, take advantage of being in his presence, taking advantage of reading his word, reflecting on it on a daily basis. So that way we can produce the fruit that is expected of us and the chance that was given to us. May God bless you with these words.